This is particularly significant in light of the recent opinion delivered by the Supreme Court on the presidential reference over the powers of the governors and the limits on those powers, particularly concerning the judiciary. I believe the judgment has left a lot of questions unanswered, more than the questions it has answered, and we are hoping to find answers to those naughty questions in the discussion today. We're delighted to be joined by Sri Tathagata Roy, former governor of Tripura and Meghalaya, Dr. Ashok Pankaj, Professor, Council for Social Development, Professor Nidhi Sharma, who will be joining us shortly, who is an associate professor at the Jindal Global Law School, my colleague Lalit Panda, who is a specialist in rights and regulations at the VIDHI Center for Legal Policy, and has also co-authored the book Heads Held High, Salvaging States Governors for the 21st Century, published by Navi Book, VIDHI's open access publication, which provides a detailed account of the functioning of the Office of the Governor, its origins, and reforms going ahead. This conversation will be moderated by my colleague, Mr. Anshul Dalmia, who also works at Charkha, VIDHI's Constitutional Law Center. Before I invite Lalit for his presentation, I want to wish you all a very happy Constitution Day, Samvidhan Divas. The mission of Charkha has been to take the Constitution to the people, the very people it's enacted for, and we do it in many ways. One is, of course, creating engaging and highly well-researched content, but also making sure that content is created in an accessible format and is understood by the very people we hope to deliver it to. I'm very happy to say that this month has de facto been the Constitution month for Charkha because we've had so much we've been doing. We came out with a detailed report on the 130th Constitution Amendment Bill, looking at its history, the positions across the world, and whether there are constitutional infirmities that should be looked at by the Parliament as it is referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. Earlier today, my team at Charkha was in Delhi government schools and we spoke to about 800 students talking about the Constitution, the values it holds, its history, and how is it that those values can be applied in our daily lives. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences we've had, and we hope to make it a regular collaboration with more Delhi government schools and cover a larger area. And next week, we shall be having a very special event titled Living the Constitution in Bangalore. Our event that celebrates how India's Constitution finds expression in people's language, culture, stories, and creative practices. Over the last 6 months, my colleagues at VIDHI have traveled across states. They have documented how different communities and languages engage with the Constitution in Kannada, Tamil, Marathi, English, Bengali, and Hindi. The result is 6 multilingual catalogs that will be launched in an event next week in Bangalore. There will be performances, there will be exhibitions, there will be artwork, stories, and different communities and expressions which are found under the Constitution. So if you're in Bangalore next week, or you have friends and family in Bangalore, please do ask them to come for the event so that we can celebrate the Constitution together. We have a lot in store for us at Charkha and at VIDHI, so we hope you keep following our work and let's continue celebrating the Constitution. With this, I request Mr. Lalit Panda to come on stage and deliver his presentation, or if he prefers doing it that way. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just do this from here, if you don't mind. With such an audience, I will be worried that I'll just, my knees will give way. It's fine, I'll just manage here. So, I guess, I mean, my task right now is to just give you to lay the ground a little bit, and I'm honored to do so with such an esteemed panel. To give a sense of what the landscape of this conversation is about. Pointing out that the questions that are involved in this judgment include a lot of technical, complicated legal questions of interpretation of specific words, and there are quite a few of them. So I guess it's worthwhile just at the outset to ask a little bit to help my panelists as well. How many here are familiar with constitutional law to some extent? And the Constitution of Governors. You can raise your hands. Don't be shy. Right. Okay, not bad. And how many of you have you read these 2 judgments, maybe even the first judgment, State of Tamil Nadu, or the presidential reference? Again, don't be shy. It's important that you tell us so that we know what we're working with. Hands. Oh, lovely, beautiful. Everyone's been doing some homework. Right, so it's definitely an extremely complicated judgment, and it's made all the more complicated because the office of the governor is working with a lot of moving parts. I'd say maybe 30 to 40 moving parts, and anytime you make an attempt to solve any one of them, you have to keep in mind all the other moving parts to do anything at all. And that's what makes this complicated, which is why I do not envy the task that Anshul has today of trying to moderate this discussion. When you're trying to read this judgment itself, you're caught by many of these complexities. but it's part of the job of constitutional law, I guess. But because this is such a complex legal question, I thought it's worthwhile that we start out kind of by giving you a broader picture to give you a little sense of the reform proposals that we had in mind in this book. This book is called Heads Held High, Salvaging State Governance for 21st Century India. Sorry, I forgot the title for a bit. It's been a while. So it's a reform proposal. Why is this so? We are at VIDHI Center for Legal Policy. I'm there. So when you're doing legal policy work, you know, you're very reform minded. Everything you want to change, even when something doesn't need to be changed, you want to change it, make a new law, reform something, amend something. Thankfully, that's not the mentality for this specific problem. This is a problem that across India's post-independence history, we have been seeing that there is a sense of consensus that something is amiss with this institution and something needs to be done about it. And while today we may not be able to talk about all the reform proposals that could be thought about, how to amend the constitution, for example, to make things better, it's good to think about the best solutions so that we can come up with the right second best solutions. That's what my hope will be. Right, so what is the problem? In the book, we try to look at the history of the constitution. It's sort of, many people know about this. Governors in colonial times were blatantly, plainly colonial instruments. So they were instruments by which, under the instructions of the Governor General or through, through the Governor General, the Crown would be able to instruct governors to be able to do certain, to be able to exercise their discretion, and they had vast amounts of discretion to be able to control provinces in India. When the Constituent Assembly sat to figure out how to set up federalism in India, they decided to repurpose this existing institution and make it into an institution that would be more respectful of responsible government, democratic government in states, and at the same time keep the interests of the union, keeping the union together instead of allowing it to fall apart in mind. That's what they tried to do. They were trying to repurpose an institution that already existed. And it's not something to be ashamed about. The institution of the Crown itself was repurposed by the British from the times when, it was a monarchy until the time it became a democracy in the UK, for example. There is nothing wrong with repurposing things. It's not any reason to be alarmed by it. But in repurposing it, they decided to whittle away the vast discretion that provincial governors had, and they gave state governors a narrow set of discretionary powers. Now, crucial to the way in which they designed this was to think about what they saw in these other jurisdictions where the crown or the king or the sovereign of whatever kind was sitting as the head of state. And they decided to conceive of an institution which had, in terms of the text of the constitution, a vast set of powers. If you see, the constitution actually says that the entire executive power of the state is vested in the constitution. So if you look at the plain writing of the constitution, it actually seems as if there is no check, nothing at all that stops the governor from doing whatever you like, the explicit words. What makes the difference is that this institution was created with a specific thought in mind. Think about this. In our country, which is a rule of law country, supposedly, bound by so many rules all across the board, that people now think that we are a low trust society where we are unable to trust each other. Here was an institution designed by our Constituent Assembly, which created an extensive constitution otherwise, making detailed rules out of a lack of trust of state governments. And it made this institution and did not impose explicit rules on it, on the understanding that in this entire morass of rule-bound players, there will be one player up there, right on top, that you can look up to and say, here's a person not bound by rules, but who will still do the right thing. I want you to think about how this changes the way we think about rules. We tend to conflate rules with the punishment that follows the rules. That if a rule does not have a punishment, it is no rule at all. If a rule has XYZ punishment, that is like a cost for violating the rule. If I have to pay a fine, that's just like a price for violating the rule. We do not instead think of a rule as a thing that we believe is the right thing to do, and that a polity has decided on the basis of democracy to come up with a statement about. Now, with governors, with all of the discretionary powers that were left with governors, the idea was that we do not bind this person, but we hope, we keep faith that with time conventions will develop, as they have in other jurisdictions where we have these sovereigns. And these conventions will guide this office holder to do the right thing in different situations. So, in the specific situation of this particular case, it is about assenting to bills. A state legislature passes a law, it only becomes in force when the governor assents to it. Now, if you do not bind this, as per the text of law, if you do not bind this, if a governor is allowed to withhold assent at all times without any rules, without any limitations on them, as it seems, the text seems to suggest on a very plain reading, very literal reading, that sounds like the governor can just stop anything that the state government wants to do, the state legislature wants to do. But the idea is that they are supposed to restrain themselves. And we have to think about where we have reached today, that we do not expect them anymore to restrain themselves. And we have every expectation of them to interfere when they can. If we do not, as say the Supreme Court, create timelines, they will procrastinate. If we do not create a rule regarding which subjects of the laws they can, withhold and can assent to, they will withhold assent, they will interfere, they will not care about federalism. This is the state we are in. So in the book, we try to create this, we try to think of this as a problem that exists in India today. When you are a fish in water, you do not know what water is. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing somebody else, but you get the idea. When we are in a country which is bound by rules, we do not understand what trust is. So to move back into an institutional situation where we can have faith in these office holders doing the right thing, we suggested that at the very least we can create the institutional background in which this trust can be reposed in that office holder. Specifically, do not impose these rules, do not limit discretion, have faith in the function that this governor is supposed to play, but you can change the real issues, which is the powers that are currently, the procedures that are currently in place for the appointment and removal of the governor. Specifically, we argued that you can appoint the governor by fragmenting power across different political players, both the majority and the opposition at the center, the majority and the opposition at the state, and maybe a judicial officer or something like that. This is a committee that can appoint, and for the removal, you can have it either by the president or by the state legislature. Both of them can move it. And that person then can be impeached in the Rajya Sabha, which is supposed to be a defender of federalism, through an impeachment process. This was the broad and simple idea. Make the change there, and you will see how things might fall into place later. Instead of making all of these small changes with timelines and all of this, this was our understanding. I do not know today whether this is necessarily the right answer, because there are many other things that are in the picture. The governor is supposed to be, defending the center's interests in the state as well to some extent. Can that be lost if we create this fragmented power? Is this something that we have to worry about? Or can there be an alternative solution? Can some of the governor's powers, some of them, which can be moved away directly to the center, let's say, you don't need a report to the president for declaring a president's rule. You can just have the center directly say so and show what it has to say so. All of these ideas can be a hybrid solution alongside that initial solution we suggested. But this was the broad thinking. I think that's a good frame with which to talk about assent as well.
I saw that a few of us had read these two judgments and a few of us hadn't. So I think I would just give a very brief summary on these two judgments and kind of lay the ground for our panelists as well. So first we had the case of the state of Tamil Nadu versus the governor of Tamil Nadu, where the Supreme Court of India held a few things. First, that the governor cannot exercise an indefinite delay on bills, and that time-bound decision-making was essential to hold constitutional governance. As an appropriate remedy, the court provided two very different kind of remedies, right? First was reasonable timelines, according to the wisdom of the court that it imposed, as well as a new concept of deemed assent, which was that the bills would be deemed to be assented from the day that they were kind of not assented by. On the other hand, we recently, last week, had a presidential reference where the Supreme Court, sitting in a 5-judge bench, advised the president on a few more things, but by holding quite the opposite. First, that the discharge of the governor's function is not justiciable at all. The court can not enter into a merits review of the decision which is taken. However, the court left an exception, right? It said that in glaring circumstances of inaction that is prolonged, unexplained, and indefinite, the court can issue a limited mandamus or a limited direction for the governor to discharge her function within a reasonable period of time. But the court again kind of reiterated that it would not be appropriate for a judicial body to lay down timelines or the concept of deemed assent to instruct the governor, right? So we see that these two cases kind of dealt with very similar things but held quite the opposite, right? We're not going to go into whether should a presidential reference, which is in an advisory jurisdiction, actually be binding on the Supreme Court. We'll kind of wait for the courts to get into this mess themselves. But I would just move on and pose my first question to Mr. Roy, who's been a former governor. I want to understand as to what should be the course of action if a governor is not exercising their powers regarding assenting, withholding, and reserving of bills. Lalit also spoke about the silences which have been mentioned. Do you think it's appropriate for the plugging in of these silences, or should it be left to the rightful office of the governor?
Before I begin, I have to enter a caveat that unlike a lot of others, particularly those on this panel, I am not a lawyer basically by profession. I am a civil engineer of all things. But I branched off into law because I had to participate in engineering arbitrations and I found the subject immensely interesting. So particularly the interaction, the interface between the two disciplines. So what I did is that I did a law degree, which is under circumstances then prevailing is the easiest thing to do. And then after that, I really plunged into the subject. I found it enormously absorbing, subject of law. And then I participated in a lot of arbitrations, both as counsel and as arbitrator. And I have familiarity with basically only two laws, that is contract and arbitration law. However, to understand even contract and arbitration law, one needs a background of constitutional law, legal procedure, and by and by I gathered some proficiency in it, if I can use the word proficiency. And with that background, I'll go into the question which Anshul just now laid before us. A very, very vexed question, as the courts put it. This vexed question, what should be the recourse if the governor does not give his assent within a reasonable time? That's basically your question, isn't it? It is very difficult to put a timeline on it, particularly when the Supreme Court has said that if in case of glaring delay, the court can interfere while at the same time maintaining that a governor's order is not justiciable. The judgment in the state of Tamil Nadu versus the government of Tamil Nadu also puts it down that there should not be any indefinite delay. I'll first say something about my own experience in one of the states. I have been actually governor of 3 states. One of them in additional charge, that is first Tripura, then Meghalaya, and then on additional charge in Arunachal Pradesh. And I will omit in which state I had this particular experience. But in one of the legislations that came to me, unanimously passed by the state legislature, it said something that any person outside the state coming to the state will have to register himself at the nearest police station, and failing which he will have to undergo, he may be liable for imprisonment and fine. Now, with my limited understanding of the Constitution, I went into it in very great detail, and I found that it is in the union list. That is, interstate movement is a subject in the union list, and the state simply could not legislate on it. It's not even in the concurrent list. Having found it, I spoke to the Chief Minister. He hemmed and hawed and sidestepped the questions, but couldn't give a direct answer. No, eventually he said that supposing I get the opinion of the Advocate General, then would you be persuaded? I said, before seeing the opinion, I can't be persuaded. So I got the opinion and I saw that the opinion was not based on any judicial decisions but on his own understanding of the law. And when I saw on a plain reading of the law, of the Constitution, that it is in the union list, I demurred. I said that I cannot pass this legislation, and of course I didn't sit on it. I mean, I sat on it a reasonable length of time, one needs to go into the time that one needs to go into such a vexed question. But when I did, I'm not taking too much time, I hope. Right. So when I did, I said that this is not something which is my with which I can agree. But what I can do is I can send it for a presidential reference. Then what happened is something very, very unfortunate. The Raj Bhavan was gheraoed by some 10,000 people. In a city of population of no more than 7 lakhs to 8 lakhs. It was gheraoed by 10,000 people, and some half of them were drunk. That's a different matter. But I didn't budge. And I sat with my secretary, I stood with my secretary, because one fear was that the Raj Bhavan was a wooden structure and it could catch fire if somebody threw a Molotov cocktail into it. So unfortunately, none of these things happened. It was a December evening, very cold, so the people eventually dispersed. But it put it in my head that this is just not the law. It could not be the law, that this is a governor's decision not to sit on a case but to send it for a presidential reference could result in a popular demonstration. And that happened on a day in which the whole of the state cabinet was away from the state capital on some plea of some discussion with the central government or something like that. So I could say that I won. I did not give my assent. It went on presidential reference, and eventually I don't know what happened, because after that my tenure came to an end. I was very happy to leave that place. But this is a sort of thing that happens when the governor is face to face with a decision which the state assembly has taken unanimously, and which has been endorsed by the Advocate General of the state. But your conscience would not let you give your assent or any such thing. So, coming back to the question that Anshul posed to me, what should be the course? Really, there is no rule. There cannot be any rule. But eventually, as we are maturing as a democracy, we are not where we were in 1947. In 2025, we are in a different sort of a place where we have not just matured, we have developed an understanding of what democracy is, what federalism is, and a lot of other things. So with all these things, it is my very respectful submission that we cannot lay down a rule. A governor has to be given that kind of discretion. And having said that, there is a very important caveat that I have to enter, and that is that the governor must be chosen in such a way that he can exercise his discretion. This is not a pinjra poll. You understand what a pinjra poll is, where old, old cows and bulls are consigned, because we don't believe in cow slaughter. So we send, this is not such a place. But I have seen people who have been put in the governor's chair, certainly I will not name them, and who are clearly physically incapable of using this, physically or mentally incapable of using this discretion. That has got to be ensured. The rest has to be left to the governor's discretion. So that is my answer to Amshul's question.
But the problem which comes in as to how do we kind of define reasonable and unreasonable periods of time, as well as in legislations particularly which are not in the grey space or which might not be kind of black and white, but we are undergoing 2 cases in the Supreme Court, both in Kerala and in West Bengal, where governors as the last appointing members of universities, of state-run universities, their powers are being curtailed and their powers are being taken off in a way, and that's quite kind of black and white as to where the law is. So I would move to Professor Nidhi, and we've kind of understood what, and the judgments have kind of told us the descriptive question as to what the courts should do, right? What the courts kind of have to do going forward. I want to ask you a bit more and a much more of a normative question as to what do you think should the courts do, as to what should the role of courts be when especially a governor does not assent to the bills for a prolonged time period. Is there a way in which we can draw a balance as to what Mr. Roy said as to the positives and the negatives?
Okay, so what should courts do? I don't think there is any political institution that can prevent the courts from exercising the power of judicial review. Like it's fairly well established now that judiciary exercises the power of judicial review over executive actions. We have a plethora of cases to support that. We can fill an entire wall of a library with cases where the Supreme Court has done that. So for example, if you take state of Rajasthan, state of Rajasthan was the region of India, where not only the court was exercising judicial review over an executive action, the court was exercising judicial review over a hypothetical executive action because nothing had happened. What has happened was one letter sent to the states, consider going for elections again. Then you go into SR Bomai, where the court has breached 74 to say that, okay, listen, we will not look at the aid and advice, we will look at the material based on aid and advice. Then you look at, Rameshwar Prasad, you look at cases such as Rabia and all, in what happened in Maharashtra. So the court has exercised judicial review. So it would be very naive to believe, sitting here, that the court should not exercise judicial review or would not exercise judicial review. Now, but to what end is the question, right? So what the court has done in Tamil Nadu, one, was essentially, no matter how we call it, it was a mandamus, right? So if the court now starts giving mandamus to the head of the executive, that is, again, I'm not saying that the head of the executive here should have as much discretionary power as they would like. I'll differ here with Mr. Roy, but that doesn't mean, that doesn't justify the the Supreme Court coming in and telling that, hey, listen, 3 months is the time you have to approve. If you don't approve, there is a deemed resident. That is not what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. So it is essentially a mandamus. Now, what the court has done in Tamil Nadu too is nothing but setting up a stage for a future conflict. Here, what is essential what is the role of the court to do? I would like to go back to what Lalit was saying in the beginning, that we again need to sit down and reimagine how we want the governor's office to look like. Okay. In the initial draft, there was no mention, there was no mention of a nominated member. If those who have gone through the Constituent Assembly debates, there was an election of president that was done away with. However, those who were even supporting that there should be a nominated member, constituent members like Kunjru or Munshi, they said you have to be then careful of the discretionary powers. So here, how we now read those discretionary powers is what essentially the role of the court should be. How are we going to envision Article 163, that is the discretionary powers, or 200 to lay out a map that we need to, if there is no amendment, then we need to reconsider what is the scope of the discretionary powers here. Issuing a timeline to an executive head to tell them that 3 months is what we give you would help no one. I mean, what happened, if you take the example of anti-defection, Keshav, where the court gave 3 months to the speaker to decide, were we able to prevent Maharashtra because of that? We simply cannot. Right? So, mandamus is definitely not the way. What we need is to reimagine how the discretionary powers of the governor we would like them to look like.
So I could just kind of take a statement from your sort of answer, which is that this case is now going to be the stage for a future conflict, right? We don't know the kind of binding value of this reference, how would courts in subsequent benches kind of adopt this reference, as well as kind of, would it put a strain on future kind of, center state conflicts which are existent. So I would move to Professor Pankaj, and here I would again want to contextualize my question with a bit of Professor Pankaj's own research, where between his kind of research and studies, he has noted that between 1950 to 2015, very selected politicians have been carefully appointed as governors in states that have a coalition government or house an opposition party. So I would want to move to you and ask, do you think if this judicial interpretation could cause a further strain between the center appointed governors and elected state governments going forward?
Thank you, Ansu. Let me begin with some reflection on this presidential reference on the power of governor to send the bill for assent to the president. There are 2-3 things which I would like to highlight here. Firstly, it was a historic opportunity for Supreme Court to fix a knotty issue in center-state relations, and this Supreme Court in a way had missed out. Once you fix this time frame, which was fixed by the judgment of 8th April, then in a way government completes the process of legislation. I will come to that later on. The second thing which I would like to say is that the concept of deemed consent or deemed assent, which was applied in the previous judgment, has been negated. Now, if you look at the history or if you look at constitutional jurisprudence, including our own constitution, there is strong presence of concept of deemed assent. I give an example. In case of parliament, when a bill is introduced, suppose the Lok Sabha is sent to the Rajya Sabha sends amendment, and Rajya Sabha doesn't pass the bill, then there is provision of joint sitting of parliament. Now there is a time lapse that in 6 months it has to be done. So the time set has been done with the purpose to ensure that legislation process is completed. Now when the time is not set for governor to give his assent to the on the bill, that means we have left it open-ended. So, and governor is very much, if you look at the constitutional position of governor is very much part of the state legislature. Now governor is also a constitutional functionary. His primary role is to perform his function as a part of the legislature. Now suppose that if legislative assembly is passing a bill and governor is also part of this legislature, assembly passes a bill and you completely sit on that. So in that case, you are also not able to perform the functions. Now assembly has a fixed tenure. Now government has got a mandate. Government wants to enact some law. And if you sit, suppose that 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and there have been cases, I have noted down even the incidences of cases. I just give you some reference from Ramakrishna Hegde has quoted this figure in 1991, it was published in Mainstream. There were about 24 bills at that point of time pending with President for assent. Of these, 2 had been pending for 7 years, 3 for 6 years, 2 for 5 years, 7 for 3 years, 58 for the past 1 year. And when he raised this issue, then his own one bill which had come from government of Karnataka was pending for 7 years. Now that means the government is not able to complete the legislative business, and governor is also supposed to be part of the legislature. Constitutionally, he is part of the legislature. He is supposed to help in completing the legislation process, because unless until he signs the bill, legislation process doesn't get completed. So in a way, this is a very naughty issue in our constitution, and these problems would have been fixed by this presidential reference. I personally, I'm of the opinion that Supreme Court has failed to take this opportunity to fix a very naughty issue in center-state relations as well. Why I say center-state relations is that now Supreme Court has said that on each case Supreme Court will take a kind, you come to the Supreme Court and will take a call on that. But now delayed, how will you define delay? How will you define reasonable delay? If you don't fix a timeline, then also there is a lot of a scope of interpretation. Governor will say that I am reading it, I am interpreting it, I am seeking opinion. But there should be something, because you are supposed to perform the function, you are supposed to perform the duty, constitutional duty, and indefinite delay. So this will again keep this whole question of remain open. Then each state, depending on the case, you come to the Supreme Court and Supreme Court will take decision on that. So in a way, I feel that this is a lost opportunity for fixing a very naughty issue in our constitutional arrangement.
Safeguard to this unchecked power exercised by the governor, right? And you could kind of agree with the safeguards, or if you have a different safeguard in your mind, so you could please elaborate on that. So first I would go to Mr. Roy.
Thank you, Anshu. Oh. Thank you, Anshu. Important question, no doubt about it. Whether we should try to reform the state government so that they don't land themselves in such a situation. And the second question is whether the chief minister is to be consulted in the appointment of the governor. As to the second question, I am told that this is already in place. The Home Ministry invariably consults. Consultation doesn't mean concurrence, of course. But the Home Ministry invariably consults the state chief minister before appointing a governor. And at least as far as my experience in the three states go, it was not a problem over there. Among the other things, trying to reform the state government, now that is a very, very tall order. Now, today, from the unfortunate state that I come, there has been, a few days back, there has been a case in which a lawyer, who is also a member of the parliament, is seriously posed a question to the general populace that is there a stash of lethal weapons kept in the Raj Bhavan? As a result of which the governor, poor man, he was forced to open the Raj Bhavan to selected people and to check whether there is a stash of lethal weapons stored over there. And the lawyer that I'm talking about, he went further and he said that he would try to prosecute the governor. Now, even a governor, even a lawyer in a very sort of subdivision or tehsil court would know the existence of Article 361, according to which the governor is immune from criminal prosecution. This man, who is a lawyer, claims to be a lawyer of a high court and is also an MP belonging to the ruling party of the state. He is not aware of Article 361. Can one imagine it? And the chief minister did not set him right. The chief minister did not say that what you are saying is wrong, now shut up. The chief minister simply let it be. So in such circumstances, I am sure that this is an extreme case. Most of India is a lot more reasonable than this. But in allowing for such an extreme case, is it possible that any steps can be taken by trying to reform the state government? I don't think it is practicable. That way, the institution of the government, having read the Constituent Assembly debates, the institution of the governor is a very sensible sort of safety valve on a powers of a state government which is blindly following a populist course of action, which doesn't make any kind of sense. Of course, that is a matter of opinion whether it makes a sense or not. But to a disinterested person standing away from the state, whether it makes a little bit of sense or not is the main question. So therefore, number one question is that Anshul posed. Number one is the Chief Minister is already consulted, and number two is any kind of attempt to reform the state government in order to get out of this impasse is impossible. Out of the question.
Why are we afraid of safeguards, right? So I wouldn't say we are afraid of safeguards, but the safeguards that are being implemented. So what Lalit posed a question, which is a better judgment, which one was trying to solve a problem. So even if the first one, we would argue that was trying to solve a problem by giving a timeline, but to what end, right? Because then it sets in a vicious cycle, because now what governor has to do is just sit down, let the clock run the time out, let the state go to the Supreme Court, let Supreme Court intervene, let the cumbersome process of judicial review start, and then you issue a direction. States go back to the governor, but what if the governor doesn't act again? Right? Like we have seen already in the case of Speaker with anti-defection. Right? What do? You go back. Right? You go back to the judiciary. So like he said, it is not a question of deemed assent. The court says, okay, if he doesn't act in the given timeline, you come back to us, we will review it. But again, to what end? This loop can continue and continue and continue. This loop continues because there is an institutional, balance in favor of the union, and that loop will continue and continue. In Tamil Nadu too, for example, the court has continuously alluded to a dialogic approach. Now, how will that dialogue happen when one party to that dialogue is constitutionally obligated to act as per the dictations of someone else? So yeah, we are not afraid of safeguards. It's just that the safeguards that are being sold to us as safeguards are not really working practically, right? And the role of the Council of Ministers, the second part of your question, would again stem back to what I was saying earlier when you asked me the question before, that governor's office was not designed to be a real executive. It was supposed to be a nominal head, and if anyone goes back to Constituent Assembly debates, you look at and I think 30 May and 31st May is when they've extensively debated office of governor. Everyone, those who were arguing for election, those who were arguing for nominations, everyone made it clear that it is supposed to be a nominal head. So what we need to decide is, do we want the office to be a nominal head, or do we want the officer to have real teeth? As long as they have real teeth in the name of discretionary powers, any safeguard by the Council of Ministers remains illusory.
Go back to the Constituent Assembly, the way our constitution was framed. Initially, when under the Cabinet Mission Plan, the Constituent Assembly was established in 1946, then 30th April 1947, two committee was constituted. One for Provincial Constitution Committee headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Another was Union Constitution Committee headed by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. These two committees were supposed to suggest fix certain principles of government at the union level as well as state level. In the Cabinet Mission Plan used the term confederation, not federation, which came later on. According to the original plan of the Cabinet Mission, these two committees were set in 1947 and they started working on that. Now, what happened is that when the Provincial Constitution Committee set the principles, it was completely federal kind of arrangement. It's rather more towards the confederal kind of system, largely influenced by largely on the pattern of American constitutions. But when this was set, when this report was given and there were discussion on the report, there were different views on this. And by that time, if you recall, by 1947 situation has on the ground level had also changed. Three important incidents should be able to influence, which later on discussion also. This was the stage in which those things have not happened prominently, but still they were in such, for example, communal violence, experience of partition, and secessionist tendency or at the demand. All of principal states were being merged, and then three still they showed that their unwillingness to join the federation. These three factors came very heavily on the discussion in the Constituent Assembly. So later on, when discussion started, then the whole concept of a kind of more autonomous state, provincial government with greater autonomy, greater power, greater freedom were diluted, and it was converted into an arrangement which we have today, more strong union, a state with defined power. In that context also, the position of governor changed significantly. And so much so that if you look at the debate, initial provision was elected governor. That was also contested by very powerful chief minister in the Constituent Assembly. VIDHI Khed from Maharashtra, GB Pant from Uttar Pradesh, and some other provincial leaders, because they felt that then he would be challenged to us, because he would, even provision by that, he would be elected from all the electorate of the state. Then this provincial chief minister questioned that I would be elected from one particular constituency, he would be elected by all the electors from the state. In that case, whether he would command greater political legitimacy or I would command. So they didn't agree on this proposition at all. So a lot of changes happened at the stage of when the drafting constitutions worked on the draft constitution. They merged this whole concept of separate constitution for a state and union into one constitution. In fact, in the initial proposal, which was also accepted by the Union Constitution Committee, that even a state could have their different kind of constitutions, like an American pattern, that you could have some kind of even liberty in framing your how governor would be appointed, something like that, but that was not accepted. So with this background, there has been shift, the shift was there in the making of the constitution itself. Now, coming back to the questions which you had started, Anshul, that whether to reform the state, I will put it rather differently. Reform the union government, reform the governor. And let me say it with the context of the Constituent Assembly debate itself, that when this whole role and position of governor was being discussed, then I said that a lot of provincials, powerful leaders were there, they were objecting to that. Then in the final, Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer and B.R. Ambedkar made two very interesting statements which defines the role of governor in our constitutional arrangement. What Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer said, I quote, "In the normal working of the constitution, I have no doubt that the convention will grow up of the government of India consulting the provincial cabinet in the selection of the governor. The president may choose a person of undoubtable ability and position in public life who at the same time has not been mixed up in provincial party struggle or factions. The central fact to be remembered is that the governor is to be a constitutional head, sagacious, counselor and advisor to the ministry." Does it work actually on the ground? That question I will also come to. Now, the statement by B.R. Ambedkar, he rather take more strict view on the position of governor and said, quote, "The governor is not to have any kind of functions, to use a familiar phraseology. No function which is required to discharge either in his discretion or in his individual judgment. If the constitution remains in principle the same as we intend that it should be, that the governor should be a purely constitutional governor." Now, given this kind of orientation of the framers of the constitution, that governors should be from impartial background, non-political background, person of high caliber, person of stature in public life, are we really appointing governor of that kind of thing? When you look at the data, I don't mean that by stature, they have a stature, but the stature of different kind. I just give you some figures from look at the background of the governor. I have analyzed the the background of governor from 1950 up to 2015. Then 52% of them were from active politics. Then civil servant 26%. And when you look closely, most of them were either home secretary or cabinet secretary, who were in a way very close to politics. Then judges and advocates who are supposed to be appointed in much greater number as governor, they were appointed only 9%. Defense officers 6%, most of them were appointed in northeastern state or border state, Jammu and Kashmir, Arunachal, Chhattisgarh. Then academics only 4% and others only 3%. So from other public life only 3%, and that to be appointed initial phase, some of the princely states, some princes or some rulers of the princely state were appointed governor as a kind of consolation that emerged, you have marched with us, so let us accommodate you. And then some also from public life, some freedom fighters who didn't come to political life, they were also given. But the initial phase there were at least some this kind of balance, but that has completely now gone. So if you look at the background, then definitely if they are coming from the active politics, and this 52%, I think 18% were from active, even some of them were chief minister and cabinet ministers. Now somebody is holding the position of chief minister today, or you appoint him governor and said the no function to be performed. Will you sit like that? So there is something need to be done at that level, and if we are able to ensure that the person really, that's why there was a kind of concept of cooling period, that somebody who has already cooled off after active politics, appoint that person. If we follow certain this kind of principles in appointing governor, perhaps he doesn't have any kind of desire to get another position, then he would function neutrally and perhaps there would be less friction. If you carefully look at the friction between the state government and governor, of course governor has to be very cautious, as Tathagata Roy said about this, that this was something not to be legislated by the state, and there have been cases and there have been court cases also in which a state legislature bent out of the way to negate Supreme Court judgment or to negate parliament legislation or to negate tribunal judgment, for example, Kaveri water judgment or Punjab water dispute judgment. In that case, governor has to definitely check the bill. But on other issues which largely fall on the domain of the provinces or provincial government, governors should easily check, because there have been some provisions in the constitution which clearly mention. In fact, one of my papers which I have written, that I have clearly divided explicit discretionary power and implicit discretionary power. And there are certain power which governor is to perform under certain direction, and the direction is given by constitution itself. There are three areas where governor role can be defined: implicit discretionary power, explicit discretionary power, and then power under certain direction, either of constitution or of a law. If we strictly follow, governors follow it, then probably there will be less friction between state government and governor as well as also center, and this should be much better in terms of a smooth functioning of our federal system.
I completely agree that there is a scope that even these solutions will not work properly, the April judgment solution, and that's clearly because it is the second best. The kind of solution that I would have thought would really work, if we try and actually make the institution of governance one that we can trust, as I mentioned in the opening remarks. But I do see evidence that there has been something.
A kind of people going to the other state, because it's creating a lot of animosity. You have to report to the police station and tell them that we are going to be going to the state. What's wrong with that? In China, it's happening. There's peace there among the people, the civilians. Our civilians are most angry, upset because of the linguistic connections, changes that are being made at every level. And I think to bring about peace, there's nothing wrong, Mr. Governor, ex-governor, about putting our names in the police station. What's wrong with it? There will be less violence, I'm telling you. When they know our names are in the police station, they will not be violent. I've seen in Bangalore, a man is hitting a fellow who's delivering food, and the person has come from North India, gone to the south. He bashes that food fellow. And he says, Kannadiga to bol nahi sakta. Lekin he is bashing that man up. He's gone from here down south, and he's bashing that man up.
Definitely, I think language has also had federalism concerns that we need to talk about, and any other questions that we can take.
Stop this violence.
Definitely.
We need to do that.
This is mostly addressed to Mr. Roy, since he said that the life of the law hasn't been logic, it's been experience. So, like, besides the substantive critiques to the Supreme Court judgment, the latest one, do you think the fact that the Tamil Nadu judgment came out just in April, the Supreme Court has acted sort of in haste in commenting before at least experiencing how the new set of guidelines would work in practice? Do you think that would be a fair criticism to the latest judgment?
I address your questions. It has been done in the past also. If you look at the Right to Education Act and look at the Article 21A of Fundamental Right, that was inserted in the Constitution through 89 Constitutional Amendment Act based on a Supreme Court judgment in Uni Krishnan case. When Supreme Court declared that right to education of 6 to 14-year children the fundamental right, then the government has to amend the Constitution and insert a provision that has been done under Article 21A. So it is feasible and it has been done in the past. And about ma'am, interstate movement, I think it's both things are happening. A lot of people are moving. There are some local resistance, perhaps. So that would be like in this judgment, a very interesting term one judge has used in this recent opinion case, that iron out the cage. So perhaps this local resistance will also gradually they accept this fact that people can move freely across the states, because so many people are moving and states are also becoming so much dependent on the labor or even technical manpower from each another state. Say for example, Bangalore, can they stop the people from outside Karnataka? Andhra, can they stop Hyderabad? Can they stop the cyber city? The whole cyber city will collapse. All Bangalore will collapse. So Gurgaon, for example, can Haryana say, even they have passed legislation and it was negated by Supreme Court. So it's not feasible. Some political leaders are trying to become rather more parochial in saying that we will restrict to the state, but nobody can stop. Given the kind of the way we are moving, in fact, in the new era of like science, technology, fast movement, interstate movement of the people, era of globalization. And then
I think that the resistance to movement can be whittled down by having more movement and not less movement. By having more movement and more mixing of people from different parts of the country and speaking different languages, having different cultures, this will promote the national integration, and therefore there ought not to be any kind of restriction of people moving from one place to another. China, do we want to become like China? We want economically, China is way ahead of us. But politically, sociologically, do we want to become like China? At least I won't. In my state of West Bengal, of course, there is a different problem, that there is not just interstate problem. I mean, people are going out of West Bengal as far as Kerala and Gujarat. There is influx of in West Bengal from another sovereign state, that is Bangladesh. The state is overrun with Bangladeshi Muslim infiltrators, and such infiltration is being encouraged. So this is of course quite beside the point, because we were talking so long about interstate movement, now we are talking about inter-country movement. But a home minister, yeah sure, just one sentence. But very unfortunate thing is, we have on record one home minister, albeit for a very short while, he had said that these two, what infiltration? These two countries, they have the same culture, they speak the same language, they go and come, as if it is that simple. If you want to know the name of the minister, I'll tell you later after this thing is over.